Well, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world and have chosen to view this session. This session is part of a series of webinars that Resolve Disputes Online is conducting with thought leaders, not just here in the UK, but around the world. The purpose of these sessions is to inform, educate, and help and assist policymakers and the wider community in the space of online dispute resolution, not just in this country, around the world, because there is an access to justice crisis currently in pretty much every jurisdiction, certainly before the pandemic, but now very much in the midst of it around the world. My name is Amar Ali, and I'm Vice President of Resolve Disputes Online. RDO provide an online dispute resolution platform for ministries of justices around the world, together with governments. It's important that when companies like ours and everybody else in this space assisting in online dispute resolution is to physically talk to and engage with the customer, rather than just come up with a product and then go to market and talk about whether that product would work. And in that sense, I'm actually thrilled and delighted that I'm being joined by two individuals that I've known for a while, certainly in the UK, but between them, they embody and represent the SME community in this country, which is in fact the backbone of the UK economy. It's something I was acutely aware of, and RDO were aware of, when we were asked to join in with a government-backed project last year to create an online dispute resolution platform for the Ministry of Justice and Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service in the UK. And I'd certainly like just to very quickly introduce them, and then hopefully I can hand over to both of them, who can tell us a little bit more about themselves and their journey in what they do. I was going to say I'll go with the person wearing glasses, but everyone's wearing glasses here today. So if I can turn to Philip. Philip is the ex-CEO of CICM, and I'm a member, and hopefully a lifelong member, unless I get kicked out and he talks to somebody after this event. Has been CEO of CICM for more years than I can remember, and they represent the credit community and the SME community, and of course in the last few weeks has stepped down from his role as Commissioner, Small Business Commissioner here in the UK, and the person wearing the jumper, I've got to be very visual about this kind of thing. The person wearing the jumper is, in fact, Mike Cherry OBE, the National Chairman of the Federation for Small Businesses. So if I could start with you, Mike, first, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty of our discussion today.
Great. Well, many thanks indeed, Amir, for that very brief introduction, and I'm delighted to tell those on this webinar a little bit more about myself and, of course, about FSB and what we do. I'm privileged to be the elected National Chair at the Federation of Small Businesses in the UK, or FSB as we are commonly referred to. And we are the largest UK business organisation by number of members. We have around about 150, 160,000 members, and those go from the self-employed, the sole traders, right through the small business community and into the medium-sized businesses as well. Our role is to lobby the UK government and others at all levels. So it could be your local authority, your local district council, it could be the local mayors here in the UK, and indeed its national governments, both in Westminster, in Scotland, in Wales, and in Northern Ireland. And we are supported as an organisation by a very lean number of full-time professional staff who support the members. And our USP, in comparison to all the other business organisations, is that we are truly member-led. So like all the other members, I have a business myself, which is a very old established manufacturing business based around timber, but supplying the hospitality industry. And as all of us know, with the advent of COVID in the UK, hospitality is one of those sectors that has struggled the most. So as with everything else that we lobby on, I have a fairly good understanding and feel the pain just as much as many of our members do, which gives me a really good insight into the issues that members bring up and we then put to governments. Just to give a little bit of background on small businesses in the UK, we comprise around about 98, 99% of the business community. We're often, as Amy has said, referred to as the backbone of the economy. What we try to do is to get that word translated into action, and that is to support all small businesses to reach their aspirations. And that means lobbying government and policymakers to ensure that the support is there for businesses, whatever they want to do, and indeed that the economic environment is also there for them to grow and not to be overburdened with regulation and taxes and other things that impact on their ability to support their local economies, support their communities. Small businesses are absolutely at the heart of those communities. And of course, to support families and the employees that they are fortunate to have with them. And of course, like all businesses, we rely on our people, and it's small businesses that are much more supportive in that environment, in giving time off, flexible time and things like that, because we know and value our employees just as much as any large business or anywhere else. But we are able to give that more supportive environment when needed. The main issues, aside from the pandemic and COVID, and I'm sure we'll come on to that a little bit later, are around late payment. That has become an endemic problem right across the UK, with far too many businesses put out of business because they're not being paid or they're not being paid properly on time. That's our number one issue, as I say, outside of the crisis with the pandemic that's created. And then there are other things, particularly around upfront costs levied on business by government, and that includes direct and indirect taxes. So national insurance contributions, which effectively is a tax on jobs, and business rates, which is a land tax on the property that you own that is levied before you make a pound in sales or any profit at all. And then, of course, environmental and many other issues, employment regulation, etc. One of the other things that people may not know a lot about FSB is that we are also, and have been for a long, long time, heavily engaged out in Brussels with the EU. And we continue to have that engagement through SME United, which is the pan-EU organization for small businesses out there. And then directly, we engage also at the WTO. And indeed, we're just beginning to engage more fully with the OECD, because both of those organizations either have working groups or indeed working committees, full-time committees on small business issues. And we believe that a lot of what we've done successfully here in the UK in supporting not just our members, but also the small business community, members or not, particularly as we've been able to get that support out during COVID, is to reach out and make sure that the trading environment for all small businesses right across the globe is much better suited, whether that be customs regulations, whether it be local regulations that impact the ability of those businesses to engage in global trade, or indeed within their own countries to stymie investment and other things that small businesses have problems with. And we believe we're being very successful in making sure that the small business voice is not just heard across the UK, but in other global arenas as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that introduction, Mike. It's very impressive that you're wearing a jumper as well, from what I can see on this hottest week that we're having in the UK this year. So, but thank you. If I can turn to Philip now, wearing the very smart shirt. I'm the one who's overdressed, I think, today, but I've got my fan on silent, but I'll hand over to you, Philip.
Thanks, Emma, and good morning to everybody who's listening, or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. I've spent the last 42 years working in credit management. The first 26 was managing credit for businesses, large and small, making sure they got paid, and often working with small businesses who were the suppliers to that business and the customers of those businesses. 12 of those years were at Vodafone, where I was dealing with many consumers as well as with many businesses. After my time at Vodafone, I spent 14 years, as Emma referred to, as Chief Exec of the Chartered Institute of Credit Management, a membership body for people working in credit management. And I'm sure Emma will be a lifelong member, as will I. And then for the last 18 months, I was asked by government to step in on an interim basis as Small Business Commissioner for the UK. It was a real privilege, it was a real honour, and it was really enjoyable. I got to work with many, many small businesses, with many small business organisations, including the FSB, with whom we collaborated widely. And I got to recognise the importance of SMEs to the economy and the recovery that we need, even more than I had before. One of the things that my last two employers did was to host for government the prompt payment code. So the Chartered Institute of Credit Management hosted that for many years. And then we transferred it to the Small Business Commissioner in 2020 in order to get all late payment activity for the government under one umbrella. And in the role of running the prompt payment code, I worked extensively with Mike and the FSB in terms of promoting that and driving change to it and making it more rigorous. And that continued through my time in the FSB, with the FSB collaboration and my time as SBC. And what I've seen over the last 18 months, particularly made up of some invoices that are outstanding, for the smallest business is often the difference between putting food on the table or not. And I think I spent most of my time as SBC trying to drive that message home to large business leaders to get them to understand the impact of their actions. And I think that dovetails nicely into the work of dispute resolution on resolve disputes online, because I think it's important that there are mechanisms through which businesses can collaborate more effectively without necessarily going to that further on as we go through this webinar. But that's probably enough from me for now, Emma.
Well, that's very kind, thank you. And apologies for the sound issues we're having, but hopefully they'll be resolved as we go along. Before we jump into the discussion today, we always like to start off with the most think of to ask our guests. And on the basis, certainly at my age, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. It is a difficult question to ask. So I will ask Mike first, and then you, Philip, second, is your favorite, and this, I promise this will be the hardest question today that we're going to talk about, is your favorite cartoon character from when you were a child. Off you go, Mike.
Well, I always remember that individual who I think all of us usually tended to admire, and mine would be Roadrunner. And the reason I say Roadrunner is because he always went for it. And I think all of us have inside us the opportunity and the ability, if we're given the opportunity, to actually go for it and achieve whatever we want in life. So that's mine for starters.
Fantastic, thank you. And that actually speaks volumes about what the FSB doing, going for it, and lobbying government and all the other stakeholders in the world. Philip.
So sadly, I can't compete with Mike's philosophical response, but I'm going to go for Fred Flintstone, simply because as a youngster, I loved his yabba dabba doo at the end of the programme.
There's absolutely, there's nothing I can say to add to that. And whether you did say yabba dabba doo on your way out of the door after stepping in and doing the small business commissioner role for government, did you have that phrase in mind as you were walking out of the door at your office or not?
Honest answer, no, not really.
No, oh, okay. Well, I'm glad we've got the most difficult question out in the open and we've had it all answered, so that's great. So hopefully today's discussion, I mean, very, very loosely, it is around online dispute resolution as an alternative to litigation and the courts. But obviously, we're here and you guys have represented and continue to do so the small business, not just the small business community, the SME community, the backbone of this country. So the first question that I really wanted to pose is that SMEs, I mean, effectively the landscape before the pandemic, and obviously I can't say after because we're still in the middle of it, the challenges. So the challenges that you had identified before the pandemic, and whether those challenges have been exacerbated during and obviously now in the pandemic. And really just that is my starter for 10, if you like, and hopefully we can have a three-way discussion about that. Who wants to jump in with that? Do you want to go first, Mike?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Amir, thank you. I mentioned that obviously late payment pre-COVID has been an issue, and what we have seen during COVID that has got worse. And there are two sides to this, obviously. One is thanks to the prompt payment code now bringing down the number of days that businesses should pay their smaller suppliers from 60 to 30. We need to get that communicated out so that we can use that metaphorically to try and encourage those who abuse the system to abide by it and sign up to it and become good supporters of their supply chains. But there's another side to it as well, and that is to try and help deal with the cultural element. I've always advocated that we also need to highlight the good practice and those who find that actually if they pay promptly, pay on time, support their suppliers, that it actually has a beneficial effect to their bottom line. And I think particularly as we go forward with perhaps issues around sustainability, making sure that your supply chain is adequate and supported properly by those larger customers is going to be fairly critical, I believe. When we look at the upfront taxes that businesses struggle with, although we've got some significant exemptions at the moment on some of those, the idea only just this week that the government was going to use national insurance as a very blunt instrument to support what is overdue and needed on supporting people with their later life care seemed to be the wrong way to do this, just at the time when small businesses are going to be at the heart of any recovery. And the last thing you want to do is to stifle that before it even really starts. And then, of course, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, broadband connectivity. We've been highlighting just how critical that is for small businesses. Obviously, a lot of the emphasis always seems to be around householders and it's the small business estates, industrial estates next to those residential areas that have often missed out. And I think if there is one thing we've all learned, as with this webinar that's reaching across the globe, you know, whether it be Zoom, whether it be MS Teams, whether it be Blue Jeans or whatever it may be, it's a critical part of how we all engage, and particularly how it can support smaller businesses to be on a much more equal and level footing with their larger counterparts when they're especially looking to overseas markets. So that's one that government here in the UK needs to really get a more fuller grip of, and actually bring the dates that seem to keep being extended back into line with what should have been in place, dare I say it, back in 2015, which just shows how far behind the curve we are at the moment. And then, of course, the environment. Small businesses very, very keen, as all of us are individually, in supporting the environmental aspirations of what we all want, but trying to make sure that not only those businesses that will be at the heart of the innovations around that, but also making sure that those businesses who need additional support to just step over that cliff edge and really do what they feel they can do in their businesses with a bit of help is going to be fairly crucial as well. So we then obviously got on to COVID, and throughout this, it's been FSB at the very heart of that, alongside others, to make sure that self-employed small business owners and their businesses get as much of the support that government has been able to push out. That, I suppose, is really where we are at the moment, and we're continuing to try and do that with all the various schemes and grants that are there. Some still trailing out through to later in the autumn here in the UK. Some of those chunks of money still need to get out from government through local authorities and things like that. And it's FSB on the ground where we're able to engage directly in supporting not just members, but the small businesses right across those communities where that support is desperately still needed.
Philip, do you have anything to add to? I mean, that was a very lengthy answer. Thank you for that, Mike. Very, very detailed. Sounds to me as though there were specific challenges. None of those have really been addressed before the pandemic. And there's a whole lot of other challenges that have just been heaped on top of what there was before to make the life of the backbone of this country far more difficult. I mean, government are all well and good at looking at the individual rather, and the business community always comes second. I don't know whether that's a fair comment. It would probably be unfair for me to ask you, Philip, because of your time in government, to answer that. But certainly, as far as the challenges aspect of it is concerned, what have you got anything that you can add in terms of flavour to what's already been said about challenges before and during the pandemic for the SME community, Philip?
Yes, I mean, by way of context, the Small Business Commissioner is an independent appointment, so I'm not a direct government appointment, or at least I wasn't when I was in post. But I think, you know, for small businesses, COVID or not, life is always tough. There are unrelenting pressures from all sorts of direction. You know, for a small business that's following a passion, you know, all of the administration stuff around the edges and the insurance and the taxes and so on that Mike's talking about are often a real burden that they've got to cope with. And it really is cope with it. But I think COVID has exacerbated that. All the above has been there and it's been worse. You know, the uncertainty of whether or not you can open or not, whether you can keep staff on or not, whether you're going to have sales or not is really difficult to manage. You know, sales for many businesses have been decimated. Others have had to try and find a new way to do business, and they've tried to do that through a time when they've had people isolating and not there, and all of the other things that go with it. And I think we can add to that some of the other pressures that are out there. You know, Brexit isn't talked about a lot, but it's caused some real issues. And by way of an example, I'm trying to buy a special light fitting to go in one of our bedrooms. We ordered it months ago. It's not in stock. I've created a pen pal out of the managing director when we keep chasing and saying, where is it? And his last answer was really insightful to me. The thing is stuck in China. He can't ship it because currently a shipping container costs him $15,000. It used to cost him $2,000, and it would be uneconomic to ship it. Now, I'm glad he's made that decision and hasn't shipped it anywhere at a massive loss, which would put him out of business. But in terms of a small business who's got customers who want to buy things and can't because of restrictions on other things, that's a real challenge. And I think the likes of the FSB are really important in terms of being there to support the community of small businesses, which, as you say, Amar, are the lifeblood of the company. 5.9 million of them. You know, the country needs them.
Yeah. I get it. You've both spoken very eloquently about the prompt payment code and in terms of when it was created, where it led to, where it is, where it sits now, and obviously the support around it. I mean, effectively at its heart, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? I mean, it's not just businesses out there consciously making a decision not to pay someone on time for goods and services, but it is a cultural thing, I think. And so my sense, and I'm an old lawyer, so I don't really look at it in the same sort of way that both you guys have looked at it, and your organizations have looked at it and supported it in that way. But how does one actually go about changing culture and getting people to think about someone else in the chain having to wait for your payment, and that payment could in fact be the lifeline for whether they stay in business or not? I mean, obviously this isn't a problem that was created by the pandemic, but it certainly, the pandemic hasn't helped. But how do you go about changing culture in this country? And I mean, this is just an open question. Hopefully we can just have a three-way conversation about it. Is it easy or is it impossible? I don't know. How do you think you would do it?
Well, if I go first, I mean, I think there is no single silver bullet to change culture. It needs to be a number of things. The prompt payment code is one of the things that's helped over the last 12 years. Other voluntary codes from industry sectors have helped, and there are other measures out there. Some legislation has helped, which you'll know about as a lawyer. The construction ad and public procurement stuff has all helped. Most of it needs to go further than it has, and it needs to be doing more than it does. But I think that the recent changes to the code that Mike referred to just now have added momentum to it. One of the things that I always say is that the prompt payment code, whilst it's had its critics through its life, it's also generated the conversation. And the conversation is really important. And I've had hundreds of conversations over the last 12 years with media and with journalists and with business organizations about the prompt payment code and what it means. And every time we talk about it, it gets it into the public awareness a little bit more, and that's all contributing to culture change. I would challenge you on one point though. Yes, the pandemic has made it worse in many respects, but it's also brought out some really good behaviours from some businesses. And I know that the FSB produced a report middle of last year called Late Again. And in there they draw out some examples of some businesses that have gone out of their way to support their small supply chain. And I think they wouldn't have done that without the pandemic, and in many cases they're continuing to do what they did then. So there have been some good things, but equally there've been lots of bad. And I think it's down to all of us and all business organisations to promote the good practice that we need to see.
I think where I was going with that is that just generally speaking, and I'm speaking in very general terms, automatically people's default position is to hunker down in a crisis. Sure. And I think that's probably, and that's just a fear thing kicking in. But that was, that's the current status quo in terms of the pandemic. But paying your bills on time in business has never been at the top of certainly the large businesses. concerned. I mean, certainly when I was a lawyer, I could quote one or two companies that still exist to this day, and they're huge corporations who I was suing on behalf of the SME community, for instance, for not paying their bills on time. Although there was always this chicken and egg type situation where lots of businesses felt as though they were in a corner, because if they did issue proceedings, they may lose the relationship they've got with that particular organization that gives them quite a lot of work. But it's just about culture. So that's where I was coming from. But it's really good to hear that there are positives to come out of COVID, and there are organizations doing the right thing now. And hopefully they will continue to do so, and others will follow. But anything to add to that, Mike?
Yes, it's interesting. We seem to be in this cultural problem that has crept in, dare I say, because when I first joined the business many, many years ago now, people either paid cash or they were granted an account. And that account meant in our business, in our sector, that if you had goods delivered this month, you'd pay by the end of next month. Over time, for whatever reason, that has crept out and extended, and dare I say, extended. And some of these corporates feel that it is quite in order to either take goods today and not pay you until the end of October or even into November. And others have taken a different view, that if they order a pallet of goods today, they'll only pay you at the end of next month for what they have been able to sell themselves. So, I mean, that's another element that actually seems to be creeping in to more supply chains, which is even more worrying. Because when you look at how long it may have taken a company to either acquire or to make goods in particular, and to then supply it to their customer, to then be told, well, you're not going to be paid for all of those, you're only going to be paid depending on how quickly we can sell it ourselves, just doesn't seem to be the right way for this cultural shift to be going. So FSB have been very strong supporters of the idea, and we put this forward to government, that actually it's partly because it's the main boards in these large businesses that aren't aware of how they actually pay their supply chains, believe it or not. So using the audit committee as a mechanism to actually report on that, alongside other things that government has brought in about the duty to report and everything else. And now, as Philip has very rightly said, with the changes to the Prompt Payment Code, these are all tools and enablers of communication. And if you can get that back to what I said at in my opening remarks, businesses realizing that actually there's a benefit to the bottom line as well in changing this culture that we've slipped into. But I think my other point on this is that society itself is also changing. Society now expects business to behave properly, and part of behaving properly is paying people on time.
I suppose certainly these days, with the advent of the internet and chat rooms and all sorts of focus groups and comments that you can make these days online, hopefully is probably one way that, all businesses will need to keep an eye on what's being said about them, the feedback that their customers are giving, and certainly the commentary their customers are giving to the wider world about the services and the goods that they've produced and sold, has got to be a good thing. I'm conscious that we've got a global audience, and there are other jurisdictions that will watch what goes on in the UK with keen interest. I just wonder whether both of you could make some comment about certainly the things that have worked well, but some of the things that haven't worked as well in the whole prompt payment side of things. Is there anything that you could share with the audience in terms of what didn't work well. So in terms of, because people are following what goes on in the UK, whether they can get ahead of the curve a little bit and not even consider those types of things. Are there any comments that you can make? Philip,
well, there is one, Amir, if I can step in on this particular one that I think all of us in the UK are well aware of, and whilst the intent was incredibly positive, in practice it's actually worked in completely the opposite way, and that's the idea that you can add interest to overdue accounts. And I think, for various reasons that Philip's outlined and you've mentioned, one of which being, of course, if you try and charge interest to a large customer, they might not take that very kindly. So although the intent was there, in practice, for that reason alone, it really hasn't worked. But with today's modern systems, if you receive an order at a fixed price, how on earth do you then try and add interest to an automated system rather than just being able to raise a supplementary invoice? Because you can't get another order without going back to somebody, if you know who that somebody is, who then has to go back to their purchasing department, who then may have to go to the finance director to be told, no, we're not paying interest on that. And so it's a non-starter. So although the intent was good behind that legislation, in practice, it's a complete and absolute failure, apart from the odd one or two cases where a business might have been able to do that and actually got that extra interest paid.
Philip?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Mike on that. I think the legislation in the UK in 1998 and then the EU in 2000 and 2011, the EU directives which were intended to resolve the issue clearly haven't. For all the reasons that Mike said, and for you, businesses are reluctant to put their head above the parapet. The only real winners out of late payment legislation are insolvency practitioners and lawyers who use it when a business is in trouble, and they can add interest and late payment charges onto an outstanding debt. But the intention that small businesses would use it as a tool to get paid more quickly clearly hasn't worked, and I think that needs to be recognised. And the more powerful tools for me are the ones that you talked about, the ESG agenda, the reputation risk, and Mike's view that someone on the board should be responsible for this is really valid. I talk to lots of big businesses where the board thinks it's doing great stuff, but actually a manager in Nuneaton is sitting on invoices for weeks without approving them, and they're not getting through the system. And sometimes I talk to board members who are appalled to find out that they're not paying their suppliers as they thought they were. And so the more we can get the agenda and the responsibility at board level, so they see the results of what they do, and payment practice reporting has helped to an extent with that, but the more we can get them to see where they're not paying on time, the more impact it will have. And I think reputation and social conscience, doing business responsibly means paying your suppliers on time, just as it means them delivering the goods on time. And we need to get to a point where that becomes the norm.
I think the only comment I'd make there is that it's not just managers in Nuneaton that would be guilty of this. It's a wider problem, probably every postcode in England and Wales. That actually dovetails quite nicely onto the topic that I'm interested in, which of course is online dispute resolution as apart from so mediation, conciliation, that type of area. Would an online dispute resolution platform assist and help encourage, cajole, if you like, the SME community to start sorting their disputes out in an open and honest and frank type of situation, rather than go down the litigation route and the courts route? So it's a good way of introducing my favorite topic at the moment, which is online dispute resolution platforms, and how such platforms could assist the SME community in this country, bearing in mind that it's, they are the backbone. They need the help from government. but they also need to sort their own problems out. Irrespective of help from government, they're in business, they're doing business with other businesses, and the last thing they want to do is concentrate on sorting out an argument or a case in court. I don't know. Can we start to talk about how, or in fact, what you initially think in terms of how online dispute resolution platforms can be beneficial to the SME community? Could I start with Mike on that one?
Yeah, I think the first comment I would make, Amy, is that small businesses steer clear of the law wherever they possibly can when they have a dispute. One, it is costly, but two, more importantly, I think, for the vast majority of them, it takes so much time and effort that they do weigh that into whether or not to go to litigation in the first place. So anything that enables quicker and simpler ways of solving disputes has to be beneficial. When you look at an online dispute resolution system, first and foremost, it has to be quick and it has to be simple. Fundamentally, though, it has to be well communicated and well understood on what it actually does or is going to deliver. So you've got a long curve on this before you get that understanding right across the business community. A, on that it's there in the first place, and B, once it's started to be used, that people find it beneficial, and that gets translated by word of mouth very often, that this is a system that will work for people when they've got a relatively simple dispute. It presupposes, of course, that the systems are set up in the first place and are easy to use. And of course, as I've mentioned, that you've got connectivity to enable you to be able to use it as well. But I think it also needs to steer clear of lawyers. As we've seen with employment tribunals, again, the intent was admirable when it was first brought in, that it would avoid lawyers and the law, and look where we're at now. If I go on to the support pages that we have available specifically for our members on employment legislation, there are reams of letters and to-dos and everything else that a business has to abide by. Now, that's one of the benefits of FSB. We have that cover for our members to enable them to get support and cover if they have a tribunal, as long as they follow the requirements, as with any insurance. But at the end of the day, the last thing we want is for it to become long-winded, to draw it out and to take time away from that business. The other thing I think that is pertinent to all of this, whether it be a dispute between business and business or whether it's a dispute between business and consumers, very, very often, small and micro businesses in particular, as we have repeatedly reported on, act no differently to consumers. So what we wouldn't want to see is an overemphasis on consumer rights as against small business rights. And I think that's an important element to be brought into whatever system is there to support businesses when they have disputes. Speed and cost.
The two takeaways from you, Mike. Philip, anything to add to that? Certainly, yes. Your position as coming out of the Commissioner for Small Businesses, and I know you were involved at a very, very high level, certainly on the project that I spoke about initially. Phase 1 has been delivered. They're talking about phase 2, but I suspect part of that is stalled because of funds from government. I think it'd be fair to say government are probably as perplexed as everyone else in terms of where the money needs to be spent, or because every government department in Whitehall is on recovery mode, and we're all still in a crisis. So I suspect government like the likes of you and I, their default position is to hunker down. But I don't want you to comment on that. That's just my own opinion. But what do you think?
I think that Mike's picked up on the two key issues, which is being quicker and simpler. My take on this, and I've said this to the team when I was working with them, last year and the year before, is that one of the key benefits of a system like this is that it would help the parties to articulate what they really believe. And one of the things I experienced as small business commissioner was that very often a business would come to us and complain they hadn't been paid. We would talk to their customer and find they hadn't been paid because there was some genuine reason why they thought they shouldn't pay them. And one of the big challenges was getting the two parties to articulate what they really meant by a dispute and why they weren't willing to pay or accept they weren't being paid. And I think that one of the things that the online process could do is to help to articulate that and get the businesses to set out what their position really is. Because quite often, when you do that, you find that there's more agreement than you thought. And actually, the difference isn't that great. And so you can come to accommodation. And I've spent many time in meetings with from payment code where businesses have complained about a signature to the code. When we've sat around the table, we've realized that actually there's a reason on both sides why things aren't working and they can be fixed. So for the future, those issues don't re-arise. And I think anything that helps businesses to just bring out and recognize and articulate what their problem is really valuable. And I think that's a really good first step of any system that could work in this space.
How does one go about educating the business community that there are alternatives to litigation? Your back isn't against the wall. If something becomes difficult, there are alternatives: mediation, conciliation, platforms like the one RDO have got in terms of resolving disputes. How does one go about educating everybody that look, it's a credible alternative, it's cheap, it's efficient, it's quick, and most importantly, it will keep your relationship intact with whoever you're talking to, because you're not physically taking them to court. It's just an open and honest conversation you're having to say, these are my issues, what are yours? Let's see whether we can come to some sort of compromise. I know I'm oversimplifying it, but what do you think? How do we do that?
I think if there was an easy answer to that, the FSB would be 10 times the size it is, and the Small Business Commissioner would have been known by far more businesses than it was. And certainly one of my big attempts as SBC was to raise awareness of who we were and what we did, and getting the small business community to hear that is a real challenge. For me, I think all the business organizations need to be involved to help drive it. And most important of all, we need compelling stories that bring the reality to life of what it means. So it's not a resolve disputes online platform, but here's a platform that does this for you and has done this for somebody else, so that people can relate to that and understand the real value and benefits.
Mike?
I think Philip's absolutely right. It's communication, and it's getting both parties to understand that it's there firstly, and that it's a valuable tool for them to engage with and to use. It's rather like what we've been trying to do now for over a decade. When you look at access to finance, exactly the same problem is still there. And that is trying to make the small businesses in particular, but the business community, aware that there are alternates to going to your high street bank if you want some additional support. There's equity out there. There is other bits and pieces, whether it be your peer financiers and people like that, who you can go to for additional support and finance. And we're still on that journey at the moment, despite all the best endeavours by all the business organisations and the accountancy professions, as well as government. So it does take time. And I think, whatever you do have in place, communication, getting both sides to understand that it's there and that it is a beneficial tool for them to be able to use, If you can't just pick up the phone and talk to somebody phone to phone or face to face, then that's going to take quite a bit of effort, money, and time before people understand that it's there in the first place.
Thank you so much, both of you. I think what I'm getting from both of you is that the SME community in this country really wants certainty and help to engage with the other party in a very conciliatory manner to try and resolve. Nobody wants to go to court, I think, but I think it's just the nature of the beast. It's about trying to tell the other side your difficulties and certainly your point of view in not in an adversarial type of situation, but certainly one that is void of that. But thank you so much, both of you. Is there anything that you would like to say in terms of closing remarks that would give organizations like RDO and others in the online dispute resolution community, because you both represent the SME community, the customers, if you like, on whether we're doing this in the right way, going about it in the right way, or whether we should, throw the book out, our design book out of the window and do something entirely different. What do you think online dispute resolution platforms could do that the litigation route currently doesn't do, if that makes sense? Mike?
As Philip said, it should be able to help with the communication, but more importantly, it really has to be quick and simple to use. I also think that you need to be making sure that whatever you put in place, you engage with the customers and not devise something that is top down from a lawyer's or a professional perspective. Whatever has to be there should be easy, quick, simple, and well communicated. Businesses, particularly at the moment, as they are struggling with COVID still, many sectors are still virtually shut down. It has to be easy for people to engage with and to use in the first place.
Thank you, Mike. Philip, any closing remarks?
Only, Amar, I think this is one of those things that could be really valuable if we can articulate it in the right way and get it understood by all the parties, as Mike says. Anything that avoids, legal fees has to be welcome to SMEs. SMEs need all the help they can get. They face all sorts of challenges. This is one of them. If it can help them, then we need to promote it and push it out there. As Mike says, it needs to be quick, it needs to be simple, and we need to make sure they get a message that they can understand, so that this is another route to help them sustain, help them flourish, and help them get this country back on its feet.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you both. I think my main takeaway is the fact that I've got one badge. I need an FSB badge on this side so I can start promoting both organizations. But I think my biggest takeaway, and please tell me if I'm getting this wrong, is that we all need to work together for a brighter future. And the more we can do that, the better it will be for absolutely everybody. We're all in this together, whether you are a large business, whether you are a small business, whether you are a micro business, we're all in this together. None of us are charities. We need to be paid for everything we do. And going forward, the future is very bright, but we need to work together. Would that sum it up, do you think?
I think Absolutely. That's an admirable summing up, Emil.
Good. Well, on that note, thank you both for joining me. It was a fascinating conversation on the hottest week in the UK. But thank you both very much. I've had a cold shower before we started, and I now actually need another cold shower and get out of this suit sooner rather than later. But thank you so much both. And all for me remains to say that good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.